This is Paul Murray Live.
G'day, good evening. Thank you, King. Always good to see you. What a show we have for you tonight. A mega Monday. Don't go anywhere. The Deputy Prime Minister and freshly elected Barnaby Joyce will be joining us live on the program. Lots to talk to him about, including the personal cost of politics, his fight that he plans to have between now and the next election. Oh, and I have to ask him about some idiot vegan protesters that today decided to cover themselves in paint that they wanted to look like blood outside a KFC, or in fact inside a KFC today. We'll show you that a little later in the show. Also, Matt Canavan is here, Rowan Dean, Nick Cater, Liz Storer. That's part of your Crackerjack tonight. And I'll tell you how Airbnb is about to screw anyone who's planning on going on a holiday in the next little while. They're going to particularly do you when it comes to the borders. But first, now, as you know, Australia is a deeply racist country. We know that because we've been told. A survey of people who watch, listen and read the ABC concluded that 76% of people say that there is a lot of racism in Australia these days. So this is an opportunity this week to solve racism, the greatest scourge in all of our country. In NAIDOC Week, where it's all about healing the country, there are lots of people who are doing their bit to solve racism, including Channel 10. Now, Channel 10, which is owned by an American company that doesn't have an awful lot of Indigenous presenters, certainly not in any of their primetime shows, well, they decided that the way they would solve racism is to change the place names on the weather map.
Weather time now, and here on Channel 10 we're doing weather a bit differently during NAIDOC Week this week. We're acknowledging traditional place names, and I'll begin in the city that we're coming to you from, Warrung, Sydney, on Gadigal country, heading for a sunny day of 17 degrees after a chilly morning, 0 this morning. And on the other side of the country, my traditional home on Noongar Budja, Boorloo, Perth, can expect more showers today and a top of 17.
And all that matters is that Twitter loved it, and Twitter did love it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to say, July 2021, racism solved by Channel 10. Congratulations. Well done to all of them as they celebrate the end of racism. Oh, yeah, and then there's Australia Post. Australia Post has decided to end racism by giving you a little spot where you can fill out the traditional place name of the package that you are sending. Here's the video they put out to pat themselves on the back.
When sending a parcel with the traditional place name, you put the name of the recipient, the traditional place name, then you put the address, then it's ready to go.
Racism solved! But of course, there will be no change to the opinion poll of ABC viewers because this place is horribly racist, right? Now to the numbers. Nobody else will tell you, but I'll show you every single night. The stuff you don't see on the 6 p.m. news, you won't hear on the radio. You will barely have to send a search party out to find it anywhere but here. Here's the latest COVID numbers. The number of tests in the past 24 hours across the whole country, 112,000. It produced 39 cases, but most of those were linked, which means known, which means 0.03% of everyone who felt crook, knew someone who was crook, went somewhere where someone was crook, or just because maybe they wanted a day off if they were somewhere other than Sydney. 0.03%. Of the 25,788,720 people that live in Australia, according to the ABS population clock, more than 6 million still remain locked down, despite 0.03% of everyone who got a test having COVID. And all of those, of course, most of those are known to be other ones. But still, we are at the beginning of a second week of lockdown in Sydney. Of course, the second week of a trapped school holidays and no end in sight, according to the Premier, despite the fact that the data has been exactly the same through all of this. 0.012 or 3% of people who've been tested have COVID.
I know everybody is keen to know what's going to happen beyond Friday's lockdown, as am I. But what I can tell you with certainty is that the next couple of days will be absolutely critical.
I hate this media strategy where they lock you down, they say it's going to be for 2 weeks, they give themselves a gold star because it might end one day earlier, or you spend a couple of days in the week saying we're going to get close to a decision, and then the news is about whether there will be a decision, and then the news is the decision, and then we still have to wait during lockdown. It's madness, it's stupid. We're on top of this. The system is working. People are getting tested. There is not a huge spike in the number of people getting tested who get COVID, and there is no huge examples of it just popping up randomly on the other side of town. We are on top of it. but still the numbers that nobody else will tell you. Of the 423 cases we have in the entire country, including people in hotel quarantine, 75 people are in hospital. But before you get too worried, a huge chunk of those, in fact more than 40 of those, are in Queensland, where anyone who has ever tested positive to coronavirus gets sent to hospital regardless of how serious or not it is. Yes, there's been a little tick up, but still in a country of 25.7 million people, 7 are in ICU, including one in Victoria today, and there are 0 deaths. Also, as we know, vaccine is the way to take those handcuffs off. 54,000 people had at least one dose in the past 24 hours, a total now of 8.2 million people who have had at least one dose. Yet despite the fact that these numbers are getting better, literally, football stadiums of people getting the vaccine each and every day, you still have idiots like the bloke who never paid a price for the failures around the Ruby Princess, let alone the bloke who wants to tell you that the most dangerous place for the virus is your house. Well, he's, of course, still trying to come up with weird ways to mention movies when it comes to the vaccine rollout, because when all else fails, blame the feds.
I fear that we now have almost a sense now of the Hunger Games, of people chasing vaccine. And until we get enough vaccine and enough GPs actually at the front line able to provide that vaccine into arms, we will continue to have effectively the Hunger Games going on here in New South Wales.
The Hunger Games, a competition where the only way to win it is to kill everyone else. That's the calm and dispassionate emotion being sent by the health hazard in New South Wales. Meantime, despite the fact that there are often rules and laws and fines if you don't wear masks, there's a very good chance that the masks that are being worn by people that you know, if not yourself, don't actually work. You see, a PPE expert has come out today to say the best part of 80% of masks that are in Australia right now wouldn't do anything when it comes to defeating COVID, because we're in the middle of COVID theatre, right? This is what he had to say, that people assume that every mask for sale, be it at a grocery store, chemist or petrol station, will protect against the transmission of COVID. 80% won't. Scott Huntsman doubled down from all-cast PPE suppliers. I wouldn't even give it to my dog, to be honest. Now, what's an example of the types of dodgy masks that we're talking about? Well, if we had a simple example to show you here, these are the types of boxes best to avoid that are made by the very country where, of course, all of this got way out of control. But you can't say that, right? Now, I want to ask a quick snap question, just to check the pulse of the nation. What do you think is a more serious crime? Accidentally not wearing a mask in New South Wales, or defacing the Prime Minister's car and assaulting a security guard in Queensland? If you answered not wearing a mask, you'd be correct. Because according to the police in New South Wales, this was how they decided to arrest, among others, a 12-year-old for not wearing a mask. This person was pepper sprayed. Seriously. A 12-year-old girl. Have a look.
Oh my God, look at this! Stop! What the hell? Look at this! Look at this!
I don't care.
Look at this!
12-year-old.
Look at this!
Next, just go, babe.
Yep.
See, no mask, but they're arresting my daughter for no mask.
Let's compare that legal treatment with the treatment of a 23-year-old who appeared in court today and pled guilty to the crime of vandalising the Prime Minister's car. Also being part of a ruckus that meant that the Prime Minister took out a side door and was escorted away from a university that was working on a COVID-19 vaccine. Well, she today was able to turn up in court, and this is what the judge said of Shari Elizabeth Lancaster. People, particularly young people, are entitled to protest and seek to bring attention to causes they care about. This Deputy Chief Magistrate goes on to say that, nevertheless, the laws are in place to try and ensure that others don't suffer harm because of someone's passionate beliefs. The sentence that this little dear copped? No conviction recorded, because it would apparently interfere with her university studies. She will do 60 hours of community service, though. Now, I'll level with you. I don't care about a one-term nothing Julia Banks. But Julia Banks has got a book out at the moment, and it's her latest version of vague references to how nasty the culture is in Canberra. And she, of course, has been given the red carpet treatment to not name names, but say vague things, among others, by Chief Government hater Laura Tingle over there at Taxpayer TV on the 7:30 report. This, in part, is what she said about the Prime Minister.
I left because of that 3 months of treatment where I realised Morrison, the most powerful man in the country, I describe him as like a menacing, controlling wallpaper. He was either doing it through his emissaries or directly. He wanted me silenced. He wanted me to be quiet. He wanted me out of the parliament. I mean, he wanted me out of the country. His response was to sort of drag me through this sort of sexist spectrum narrative that I was this weak, over-emotional woman to the bully.
What? Now, of course, you know that what actually happened was that she was Malcolm Turnbull's suicide bomber, political suicide bomber. You see, after Malcolm Turnbull left the parliament, they effectively were dead level. Once she moved to the crossbench, they were effectively a minority government. But the reason I mention all of this tonight is not to give more attention to the vague claims of which she never puts a name on here, because, of course, she's apparently concerned about legal consequences here, but it's the packaging that the ABC put around it. Firstly, from that grab, you would think that she didn't contest the last election, that she decided to leave the parliament. In fact, that's actually what they wrote on their very own website today. One of the bits under one of their photos today said, Julia Banks says she heard the PM's office was backgrounding against her after she decided not to recontest the next election. But as you can see, she did recontest the next election. She just moved from the seat that she was elected to Parliament in, and she tried to be a spoiler candidate against Greg Hunt, who, of course, had the ultimate sin of voting against Malcolm Turnbull to remain Prime Minister. And she wasn't very successful because, as you can see, she didn't even get to the runoff. In fact, she finished third with just 13,000 votes, or 13% of the vote, compared to Greg Hunt, who got 45,000, and the Labor Party, who got 23,000. So it's one thing for this person to be given free access to say whatever they like, to flog a book. It's a free country. But somebody whose full-time job it is to report on politics and was there at the time and knows the chronology of what really happened when it came to Julia Banks, they should tell you up front she didn't decide to leave politics. The people of Flinders decided not to elect her as a spoiler candidate. Now, of course, it is nothing but a coincidence that the very same people who publish her book are the same ones who published the Ghosts book last year. Now, it's the 4th of July in the United States, and there's lots of ways that they like to celebrate the great free red, white and blue of the United States. There's whatever the heck Mark Zuckerberg was doing when he decided to post this image of himself, presumably excited about his ability to influence the last American election. Then, of course, there's the annual tradition of the Nathan's hot dog eating contest, where the world record has been broken. 76 hot dogs eaten in just one session. Yet another world record. Joey Chestnut, congratulations. In fact, can we show some of this? Yeah, why not?
Joey Chestnut now unofficially eclipsing 60 hot dogs and buns with under 3 minutes remaining. Jeff Esper, the number 2 ranked eater in the world, following behind him at 40. And he has eclipsed 70 hot dogs and buns. He's the only person to do it, to top 70, and he has now done it 6 times. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, I'm a fat bloke, and even I think that's disgusting. There's, by the way, a thing called Major League Eating in the United States that helps sponsor that event. Again, I'm a fat bloke, and I find that disgusting. But still, that's what they like to do, to celebrate the great freedom that is the United States. But they have even more people in that country who hate their country, and they, of course, get plenty of attention in the mainstream media. We know this around Australia Day each and every year. We know this around Anzac Day each and every year. Well, what about somebody who decided to write an opinion piece for the New York Times who suggested that the American flag is no longer a symbol that can unite people in the United States? In fact, This person went on to suggest that if you fly the American flag, then you're obviously a Republican and you're obviously pro-Trump, so therefore you don't believe in democracy. Another one, apparently the Statue of Liberty. Well, should it be torn down now? Well, according to this person, it is no longer a symbol of freedom because America has never lived up to the promise of the gift from France way back when. And then there are the next generation of leaders. The people who have been turned into drones and robots for the far left, the people who constantly think Twitter is real life. And they were asked whether they love America, whether they think there's anywhere better than America, and this was part of their response.
Are you proud to be an American?
No. I feel embarrassed to be an American every day. I think a lot of things about this country are really embarrassing. Just like, racist history, colonization, even currently, just what's going on with politics and the cops.
So the key is all you have to do is remember the hashtags. You don't actually have to provide any evidence of these things. It continues.
We claim to support everyone, but we continue to support Israel, which is which are dislocating quite a few Palestinian people, and that's it's sad. I don't know.
And we save the best till last. Happy 4th, America.
Can you name a country that's more welcoming than the United States?
Not really. I don't really know that. I don't really have that much information.
Can you name a better country than the United States in your opinion?
I'm not sure if I can. I don't think I can.
There's probably a really tiny European country that's thriving.
Seriously? All these people who hate the freedoms and modernity that are only possible because of the freedoms and modernity that the United States has given to itself and has exported around the world. Ones that have been defended in not just one, but 2 world wars and in many, many other wars around the world, where people have given their lives so they can be the spoilt brats that they are today. But sadly, these people, they don't just have a say, they've got a lot of power. Because it is their voice that gets added to the Twitter echoes, the people who believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with one of the greatest countries in the world. Now, in part, I show you this because, yes, it's funny to laugh at some of the silly things that happen in America, but what happens there will happen here. Now, there is a discussion happening right now about whether Anastasia Palaszczuk will be at odds with her deputy. You see, her deputy last week went out of his way to say that one of the greatest COVID dangers to Australia are people who leave Australia, go overseas and then come back. But magically, Queen Palaszczuk thinks these rules shouldn't apply to her. You see, she has to go to Tokyo to get the Olympics for Brisbane in 2032.
My question to you, Premier, is do you think it is appropriate for politicians like yourself to keep making trips overseas at a time when there is no pathway for Australians to be reunited with their own families?
The reason that I would be going to Tokyo is to actually to help secure the Olympics 2032 for Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. This is a very important meeting, and it is expected by the International Olympic Committee that a federal representative, the Premier and the Lord Mayor of Brisbane attend to present in front of the International Olympic Committee.
But apparently it's more important than you being able to see a dying relative, or your kids being able to visit you in the final days of your life. Remember, of course, she loves having a system for herself that others don't have to apply to. Remember, there's limits on the types of vaccines that you're able to get if you're a certain age. But she's the Premier and she's going to the Olympics, so she can have Pfizer.
I may be required to travel to Tokyo with the Lord Mayor and maybe the Prime Minister. There may be a requirement for the state to present to the whole Olympics Committee about the Olympics, and I would have been unvaccinated, and that is why I had the Pfizer.
What about stopping COVID? Matt Canavan is a national senator from Queensland, part of the LNP, joining us now from Rocky. Sam Crosby, Labor to his bootstraps, and I'm always pleased to say joining us from lockdown Sydney as well. Matt, let's start with you. Should the Premier be allowed to leave the country to go and secure the Olympics in 2032?
Well, in short, yes, I've got no problem with her going, Paul. I have a problem with her hypocrisy, though.
That's the point.
And the complete embarrassment that she has become as Premier over particularly these last few weeks. It's been a shocking few weeks for the Queensland Government. They've undermined the vaccination rollout. They've stuffed up in their own health system and quarantine system. And now they can't seem to lie straight just about simple issues here. Even this whole pantomime about is she going or isn't she? Is that why she's getting Pfizer? Just tell us. And I've got no problem. If she needs to go and we need to try and do that to help secure the Olympics for Queensland, great. I'd love to see the Olympics come here. We need to try and do that. But let's get over all this COVID rubbish, right? Why have we cut back our international arrivals by half last week? That's what I was against. And this hypocrisy here. We should be moving forward here. We should be getting rid of restraints and barriers. No Australian has died from COVID this year. We've got to stop becoming so panicked about this. Get on the pathway of learning to live with it. More and more Australians are getting vaccinated. 70% of older Australians are vaccinated. There is no reason why we should not have the capacity to have more Australians reunite with each other in this country rather than put up more and more barriers to that happening.
Sam, the Queensland Government said that fully vaccinated people couldn't be with their child in the first week of its life. The Queensland Government has said that fully vaccinated people couldn't see their dying relatives. So should this fully vaccinated Australian be able to go and impress a bunch of people for the Olympics in 2032?
Yeah, look, I don't want to get off on the wrong foot agreeing with Matt Canavan, but I agree with Matt. Of course, I think she should be able to, but similarly, I think the 36,000 other Australians who are stuck overseas waiting to come home should be able to come home. I think the Queensland government was wrong to ask for further reductions in that number. I think the federal government's been wrong in not allowing as many Australians to come home as want to come home. You know, I'm still old enough to remember a time when citizenship meant that at any time in the day, the week, the month, whatever you want to come home, if you're an Australian citizen, you're able to come home. Sadly, over the last, 2 years, that's no longer the case.
Now, also on COVID, a lot of people say, well, why don't we hear somebody in the Australian government say common sense things when it comes to treating this as the pandemic we know it to be rather than the one that we feared it to be? Well, guess what? They have. They have been the whole way through. But Josh Frydenberg is the latest to do it today. Josh Frydenberg has said exactly what we've been saying on this show since the start of the pandemic, which is that proportionality is what matters. And now that we know that there's a difference between exposure sites, the number of people who get tested, the number of people who get it, the number of people in hospital, the number of people in ICU, and the number of deaths, well, that's a point that he thinks we should start to focus on as well. It's what's happening in the UK. It's starting to happen in the United States as well. That the things you panic about are the people who are truly going to get crook, not the people who just will contract this virus, 99% of which won't end up in hospital, let alone die. Well, Josh Frydenberg said today that we need, as a nation, to move from our focus from suppression of the virus, ultimately, to living with the virus and preventing hospitalisation, fatalities and serious illnesses. Here he is saying it too.
We need, as a nation, to move our focus from the suppression of the virus, ultimately, to living with the virus and preventing hospitalisations, fatalities and serious illness. That is the pathway set forward in the roadmap that the Prime Minister took to National Cabinet last Friday.
So Sam, we agree, right? This is the way to go. This is it. The data is there, as I was reading a little bit earlier today. There have been, in the past day or so, best part of 50,000 people, more than 115,000 people that have been tested. 0.03 end up having COVID, of which still single digits in ICU.
Yeah, look, I think he will be right. I'm not entirely sure he is right now. I think the example you brought up earlier was the correct one. The UK has moved away from talking about the instances and talking about the numbers of ICUs and ventilators and deaths. The critical difference there is they've got, 50, 60% of their country has had the vaccine, where I don't know what the numbers are, but we're still a long way behind that. So, look, I think in a couple of months he will be right. Once our numbers start to encroach on those, I think, yep, bang on. The problem is that I think for a large number of Australians, getting COVID still has sort of, mortal danger and fear written all over it because they're unvaccinated.
Yeah, but the thing is, Matt, that there are people who have been offered the vaccine, even in aged care, who say, no, I don't want it. There are plenty of people watching us tonight who say, no, I don't want it, stop talking about it, right? By talking about it, somehow I'm pushing it upon people. Well, that's crap if you're actually paying attention to what I'm saying here, right? It's your decision what you do. But the truth is, 8.2 million people have already had at least one dose. In a couple of months' time, that's going to be 8.2 million fully vaccinated. We're going to be in the best part, 60 days' time, we're going to end up with more than 10 million people that are fully vaccinated. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and good on the Treasurer for pointing at it.
Absolutely. I was going to say the same thing, mate. Good on Josh Frydenberg here. That's what real leadership is. It is a little controversial for him to say that, but it's the right message. And I do pick up a bit of a groundswell of shift here in the last month or so where Australians do want to move on. I think you can see that in the fact that compared to the other lockdowns, I don't see the same kind of compliance, let's say, or some people not even worrying about masks and these things because we've just had enough of it. We've had enough of all the public health Nazis telling us that we'd have masks on forever and QR codes all the time. Look, there were reasons to do that, and there were sensible reasons. But as I said earlier, it's not just that you mentioned 8 million Australians have the vaccine. 70% of older Australians have had the vaccine. And as you say, some of the 30% don't want it. They were always the vulnerable population. That's what we were locking down for. And it was, I think, a good thing that we cared so much for our older Australians that we did and bore those costs. But largely now, the vaccine is available to that cohort of people. There are still risks for us that are younger. But compared to other risks in life, we've got to put these things in perspective here. And we cannot keep locking down our states and our cities and our businesses time and time again. You're absolutely right. In a few months' time, the vaccine will be widely available, and we've got to prepare for that moment where we do open up for good.
Well, think about the fact that, OK, it's been a very long 18 months, but in the span of our lives, it's a blink, right? The idea that a couple of months, yes, a lot of noise now, but it's going to be a blink before we get where we want to get. As fast as we wanted to get there, no. But there's plenty of reasons why that's the case that, in my view, don't involve half of the garbage being screamed at the moment. Now, I want to ask about vegans, and particularly ones that like to bring a bit of attention to themselves, including a vegan activist who went to KFC today. Now, they decided to, put on a show about, of course, meat is murder, all of that business. Here, I think, do we have a full picture of this, Sheila? What's her name? Tash Peterson. There you go. So she's done this before, where you go into a butcher's shop and meat is murder and all the rest of it here. Here's part of also what happened at KFC today. And then 6 nuggets with sweet and sour sauce. Can I also have a large chips as well? Oh, sorry. Did you like
popcorn chicken? I think.
Not a person turns around and leaves the store. That's what I love about this. No one was scared off by this, Sheila. They will just step over it, thinking that there's been some sort of sweet and sour sauce accident.
Yeah, when you've got a craving for popcorn chicken, Paul, nothing is going to stop you.
I will push through every one of those hairy armpitted people. I'll just push them over and get out of my way.
I didn't see the footage. I couldn't see it. Was she wearing a mask, Paul? That's what I want to know.
Great question. I don't know. I haven't paid attention to that part of it.
But it sounded like there were some cows in that audio that they were playing. I mean, what's going on?
Does she know that it's a chicken restaurant?
It's a chicken restaurant.
Yeah, she does have a mask on, so good luck to her. But again, look. These idiots,
good on. But this is the point. Going to your editorial before, Paul, she will face, I'm sure, a lower fine, lower penalty than anyone who wasn't wearing a mask this week in Sydney, because she'll have the same defence you raised in your editorial that, she's a young person and she has the right to protest. You can protest about anything in this country accept the COVID rules. You're not allowed to protest against wearing a mask. You're not allowed to protest against public health orders, but you can protest about anything else. Isn't it a great country?
But she just better hope that she doesn't get a judge who's got a KFC hang-up, because I tell you, if I was a judge and someone came in before me saying, here's what I did at your KFC restaurant,
mate, I'd sit there with a meat
At least she could have got one of those towelettes, Paul. She could.
Yeah, correct. But also, Sam,
she didn't. She put a lot of blood around it. She could get some of those towelettes to clean it all up. They're really handy.
Correct. God love those little moistened towelettes. But also, yes. Sam, about that comparison, right? Literally, a 12-year-old is pepper sprayed in a dispute about whether she's wearing a mask or not. A person who attacks the Prime Minister's car. No conviction recorded because it would affect the poor dear's university career. And by the way, it's not the first time that an action of hers in and around a protest has resulted in her going to court.
Yeah, look, I don't know the cases involved, but it sounds absolutely crazy, doesn't it? I mean, a 12-year-old girl getting pepper sprayed, she's a kid. She's a child. For heaven's sakes, we've got to introduce a bit more civility and normality about these things, don't we?
Well, certainly some things require that sort of a response from a law enforcement that I support. But how does anyone justify the pepper spraying of a kid when the incident that all of this is about a freaking mask? It wasn't like there was an active shooter situation in play. All right, last one here. For you lads, Barnaby Joyce in a couple of seconds' time. Don't go to bed, anyone. Now, how is China still a developing country? How do they still get away with being able to call themselves a developing country when they're having spacewalks right now? Now, there's a lot of people that are very poor in China, but they're having spacewalks literally right now. Have a look at some of these pictures, okay? These are Chinese astronauts on the Chinese version of the International Space Station. They have rovers right now on Mars. Yet, Matt, for some reason, they are still a so-called developing country. I'm pretty sure, and no disrespect, but I'm pretty sure you can't name a single African country that has got its own international space station.
Well, that's right, Paul, and to some extent this is semantics. As you're right, there are a lot of poor people still in China, and China's economic output per head is nothing that great. There's 1 billion people there. But the key point here is if they've got the money and resources to spend on spacewalks, on a large military program, on building aircraft carriers, they should not get free passes at things like climate conventions, right, on the basis that they're a developing country. If they've got enough resources to spend on these things, they shouldn't be given a free kick on the other things as well. That's their choices to spend resources in this way as the Chinese Communist Party, but there is no way that we at Glasgow should be entertaining any idea, that's the climate negotiations later this year in Glasgow, any idea that somehow China should not have to have the same obligations as every other country in this under any such agreement, with 30% of the world's emissions, and they should be enforced. They need to be enforced. They can't just sign a piece of paper and walk away. That's not worth the paper it would be written on.
Yeah, Sam, you go.
You just have to remember, the first victims of the Chinese Communist Party are the Chinese people themselves. There are still, 1 billion people out there living in dirt poor, abject poverty. The definition for what makes a developing country is a per capita income of $12,000 per year. These guys out there, the vast, vast majority of these guys are living on about $6,000 or $7,000 a year, whilst you've got the CCP leadership and 4,000 of their mates are multi-millionaires investing billions of dollars in space programs and every other thing. So, I don't think you can lose sight of I think the real victims of the Communist Party over there, as with all communist parties, are the actual people.
Well, but the problem is that when they're able to take people from those selected few to become the representatives of China, to sit on the WTO, the WHO, the UNESCO, all the rest of it, right, which is they're able to fiddle the definitions of what they are. It's a state that in part is setting the wage thing, and they're deliberately doing it so they can continue being developing. Remember, they can do whatever they want when it comes to emissions till 2030. They can keep going, right? America's promising to halve by 2030. One wishes to deindustrialise, one keeps going. One is on the ascendancy, one is the one we need to keep on top. But, apparently everything's racist about America.
And Paul, if you would have seen, you might have seen tonight that a Chinese magazine has published a scenario of China invading Taiwan and a video of how that would go down to coincide with the CCP's 100th year anniversary. So why, when this is a serious threat that China may do something as crazy as invade a democratic nation of Taiwan's size, why would we be giving them the ability to industrialise while we de-industrialise? Like, that's the trade here. We're saying, we'll shut down our factories, but buy lots of stuff from your factories. That is absolutely insane for us or any other Western nation to be entertaining right now.
Utter madness. We're going to talk to the Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, next cab off the rank here on Paul Murray Live. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Matt. We'll talk to you again very soon. Barnaby Joyce next. Don't go to bed. Lots more telly, I promise, here on Paul Murray Live. A very excited nation, in my view, reacted to Barnaby Joyce back where he belongs as the Deputy Prime Minister. Certainly the nation that we like to talk to each and every night on Sky News on Win, also all over the country via Foxtel and online at skynews.com.au. That introduction will get me into trouble, but I don't care. I'm glad he's back as the Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce joins us now from Real Australia. Great man, congratulations on the reascendancy to the throne. Well earned, well deserved. What do you want to do with it second time round?
Welcome to you. It's not from the lodge in Canberra, but from the cottage in Danglemar. I think I come back to it probably a little bit more with a sober approach. You're not so much fascinated by that understandable excitement about getting the office. You're almost very aware and humbled by the opportunities and realise how brief they are, that you get this incredible opportunity to do it again. And you're incredibly motivated to use that very small period of time in one's life to try and make your nation a stronger place and to look after the people who sent you there, which is regional Australia. And so that's basically what's motivating me. And we, rather than go out and do a heap of press conferences and sit down interviews, I went straight out and talked to the department and started working out how we get the inland rail going quicker, how we start getting more dams built quicker, how we make sure our nation is as strong as possible, as quickly as possible to deal with the issues that you were just talking about, the rise of China, and making sure that your children and grandchildren and mine and all your listeners have the freedoms and liberties that they just accepted as a birthright, unquestioned, that they actually are able to hand them on. And we do that by everybody in this nation in their corner, really focusing on what the main game is: make our nation strong, don't threaten our neighbours, but make our nation strong and resolute so that we can deal with a new world order which is coming about.
We were there, of course, for the whole ride over the past couple of years, all the different ups and downs, and certainly you've been very kind with your time here quite often as a panellist, and the passion that you brought to things over the past couple of years is what I say about why people are excited to see you back. As you say, about rather than rabbiting on telly and all the rest of it, just get on with the job. Re-engaging with the public service, knowing that if they want to, they can slow play the ball on you, all the rest of it. Have you sent the message very early in the departments of infrastructure, transport, regional development? Oi, you work for me.
Well, I think people understand that. There's a lot of people who are there who I've been around since Howard was the Prime Minister, so I've been around for a bit. I have the capacity, if required, to put my foot down. I will sack people if that is what is required, and or basically make it very well known that another job would be the best outcome for them. And I think people are aware of that. Now, I don't go into a department to declare war on them. I go into a department to say precisely what you said. I'm the boss, and this is how I'm there. The reason I'm the boss is not because I choose personally to be. It's because I was elected by the Australian people who appointed me to this role. And government ultimately comes from the people, and that's who we're there to serve. And their appointment is me by reason of the ballot box, and I, on their behalf, through the government, appoint you. Now, let's make sure we don't forget the order.
Yeah. Now, how do we best take on China? I mean, obviously, you've got a Prime Minister who couldn't be clearer that he's on the right side of this, a Defence Minister who couldn't be clearer and is on the right side of this, a Deputy Prime Minister who is exactly in the same spot. But what do you bring to those conversations? How do you make sure that we can sharpen the focus when Cabinet sits around and makes its decisions, that an eye on China is in part the whole game?
Well, the first thing is I talk to the Australian people, as do other senior politicians through you, and I say your biggest challenge in the future is not COVID. I'll come up with a vaccine. People get vaccinated. The world will move on. It's not climate change because that's an issue, but it's not the big one. The big one is your relationship with China and how that works, because that is the one that can deprive your family and your future of your liberties and your freedoms that you don't even think about now. The fact that you can watch this show and you can say what you like, that you can control what investment comes into this nation, that you have control over the terms of trade, that you're not under threat of a closure of your fuel supplies, that you're not at the beck and call by reason of fear as to how you act in the globe in the future. That's the first thing I say. So worry about the realities, the actual issues that are before you, and not other issues which may be important, but they're most definitely secondary to the big one. Now, I suppose going to my track record, long before, when, as I said, in the past people called me a xenophobe, a bigot, a redneck, and then they just said I was right. When I went into bat, even against my own side, to try and make sure that Chinalco, a Chinese state-owned enterprise, didn't buy and take over Rio. I couldn't believe it at the time. And everybody's saying how outrageous, and it was just a pure world and everything was fine, and I was just a little bit old-fashioned. Well, I don't know how people would react now if you said a Chinese state-owned enterprise was going to take over Rio, one of the biggest exporter of our biggest resource of our nation. And we had other issues all the way through, and I made my views well and truly known about what I thought about the Belt and Road policy, and that was, I believe, an extension of a mechanism for the expression of power by China through each corner. Now, for us, it's doubly, triply difficult because it is our region. This is not an issue about Europe, where we used to run over there to help them with their problems. This is an issue in our area, and I don't know whether Europeans are going to be running over here to help us with ours. And the second thing, they're our biggest trading partner. You always hope and pray for a change in attitude, but you've got to be a realist and listen to that CCP conference in Beijing the other day with 70,000 people cheering, and the rhetoric that was within that of, belting people's heads, battering people's heads against walls, the issues, the sort of irresolute view of Taiwan, when Taiwan is a democratically elected government on an island that only for 2 years out of the last 120 has been run from Beijing. And this is going to be how this all works, and what both the Chinese are saying they're going to do and what the Americans say the Chinese will do is terrifying for us. So I'm not being an alarmist. I'm saying you just read the paper and say, okay, now how do we prepare our nation just in case? Because just in case was an incredibly small probability in the past, but now it's not an incredibly small probability. And what I'm talking about there is how the whole world reacts to the Taiwan situation and what happens next. So, we've got to be, the only thing we can do in our nation is make ourselves strong. That means our agricultural sector, open up new areas of irrigation. In power, don't be scared about going to nuclear power. In mining, understand where your money actually comes from in this nation. Your export dollars, it comes from mining. Don't try and replace it because you've got, nothing to replace it with. And not to the same extent of export dollars that you earn. And if people say this is outrageous and I find you, imprudent, or I find you obnoxious, you telling me that, well, you accept the political consequences of telling people the truth. Yeah? I mean, that's one of the first jobs you have in politics is tell people the truth. And that way you can say, well, I wasn't a coward. I informed you as the best, on my best analysis of how I saw things. And you would see them the same too. All you have to do is pick up the papers, read the New York Times, read your Australian papers. You can go from Clive Hamilton to the Australian in Australia, from the right to the left, and they're all giving you the same mail. So you either accept it or you stick your head in the sand.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we love when it's said publicly. I'm talking about, of course, people in the media, but just how will you make the decisions about the arguments that you're going to have with your own team publicly versus privately versus an angry text here or there? Because as leader, as Deputy Prime Minister, you know that the story becomes the process of a disagreement between Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister as opposed to what the hell the disagreement is about. So how do you make the decision between the stuff that you'll blow up privately versus the stuff that we are actually going to be able to see and hear?
That's a fair question. Okay, have you heard of one disagreement between myself and the Prime Minister yet?
No, not one.
Well, no. because I've been around the game long enough to understand that you respect the office of Prime Minister, absolutely, 100%. And as a person, I respect Scott. I think he's a very decent human being. But where I always probably make a difference is people say, oh, so he's your best mate. I'm sure the Prime Minister has great mates and he goes to the footy with them. And you know, I don't have to be his best mate and he doesn't have to be mine. We have to be able to work together in a constructive, business-like way for the betterment of our nation, number one, and to make sure that for our particular constituencies, mine in regional Australia and him in Australia as a whole, but mine concentrating on regional Australia, gets the best possible deal that they can get. And that is understandable. And it's just like you are working at Sky and all your listeners in their own office places. You don't go into your office place and say, oh, I'm the best mates with everybody here. People say that's absurd. You might have some mates here and you might not. But you're going to work with people here and you're going to treat them with respect and come to an outcome. So when you talk about how you deal with that, well, I suppose it's like everything. The more important and the more, I suppose, the issue that might create a bit of grief, you try to keep it as succinct and polite and businesslike and between the two people and to try and nut that out. And you ventilate policy on behalf of your people so that they know you're in there fighting for them. You've got to do that. And how you negotiate your way through that, you try to keep it in the realm of being polite as possible, so you look like a cohesive government. But I expect the Liberals to always ventilate Liberal policy, and I know they would understand that the Nationals have to ventilate Nationals policy, and you have to do it in such a way as your constituents know that you haven't just succumb to the glory of the ministerial leather, but you're actually in there and you're going to try and make sure that you get the very best deal for them. But on the same behalf, as we just talked before about the issues in our region and the rise of China, the last thing they want you to do is to sink the country, because that's the boat we're all floating in.
Yeah, absolutely. Last one here. I loved when you were getting sworn in, the awesomeness of that moment as a human being, but then the normalness of a dad. They got a couple of kids who couldn't care less whether it's Yarralumla or whether they're at the local pub in Armidale. I love that little moment. I know some people sort of try to play games when they used photos of your kids in memes and all that crap. Poor Vicky trying to put them all in place. I just love that. So tell us, were you fully focused on the boys or the Governor-General when you are formally becoming the Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, I didn't quite hear the question, but it was about the boys. Look, it's great having, I love my, obviously, I don't have favourites. I love my girls, I love my boys, and about that age, they all do the same thing, which is they're completely and utterly uninspired by the grandiosity of the event, and they decide they want to come over and say good day to you in the middle of your swearing-in photo. That's precisely what you've got to do, and you've got to politely somehow deal with it. I mean, they're used to the Deputy Prime Minister's cabin here at Danglemar and can't quite make the sense of the big white building called Government House. And I suppose they're looking for their trikes to go. And in fact, they did. They took off and went running around Government House. We had to go find them.
I love it. Normal, it's why we love you. Congratulations again, mate. Thank you for being so open with us over the past couple of years, and we look forward to doing the same for the next few as well. All the best, mate.
You too, Paul, and your listeners.
Good on you. He's a good man, isn't he? Barnaby Joyce, Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. And again, I love the idea of just kids running around. It's normal stuff, right? Rowan Dean is here. Matt Thistlethwaite, Labor MP in Sydney. Both join us now. Alas, lockdown because 0.03% of everyone who got a COVID test today actually has COVID. So what about this here where, surprise, surprise, Rowan, a survey has shown that the majority of Australians would like a system put in place that says there is something that comes with vaccination, that vaccination equals exemption from stupid rules like the one that mean you can't leave your house for anything but the official reasons.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting survey, but I would take issue with the conclusion drawn by the newspaper with what it was saying. People were saying, well, yes, let's open the borders because people are getting vaccinated. Of course, the internal borders is absolutely sensible. But, Paul, I have to say again that there is a very, very clear line between governments that incentivise vaccinations and governments that coerce vaccinations. This is absolutely fundamental. I can give you the lengthy ethical arguments to do with the Geneva Convention, to do with the Declaration of Helsinki. But the bottom line is, it is absolutely important, even in the times of COVID, and you don't sacrifice important principles just because things are a little awkward at the moment. Even in the time of COVID, Paul, the final decision whether to take a vaccine or not take a vaccine or take this treatment or that treatment or anything else must rest as, and I quote, none other than Dan Andrews, must rest between the GP and the patient or the individual, and not politicians and bureaucrats. So by all means, the bureaucrats can give all the advice in the world, the politicians can make all the recommendations and encouragement, but if we get into a situation, Paul, where certain people can't cross a border or go and see their kids because they've chosen not to be vaccinated, as opposed to someone else who has special rights, we are living in Stasi Germany, and that situation must never be allowed to arise.
So, Matt, what is the scenario here when, because we're in a bit of a death spiral here, right, which is, because we haven't had a lot of cases, because we haven't had a lot of deaths, yes, Victoria, we all know what that was about last year, the urgency for vaccination isn't there like it is in the UK, like it's been in the United States, regardless of anything else, and there's plenty of valid criticisms about actual rollout. So at some point, again, that difference between coercion and reward, the simple reward is to say, well, look, it doesn't matter. You don't have to pay attention to the Anastasia Palaszczuk press conference because if you've had the jab, you can keep moving. But obviously, Rowan's absolutely correct. You can't force people to get the jab. But if we're going to be in a scenario where most people go, meh, do it later, then we're kind of going to be stuck in a cul-de-sac, aren't we?
Well, Paul, I would have thought that millions of Australians being locked down, and I'm locked down with 4 kids at home at the moment. I tell you, it's tough. If you want an incentive, there's a pretty good one, I would have thought. The fact is that we do need to get the vaccination level up to that critical level so that we've got enough people moving around the country safely enough so that we're not spreading the disease, particularly to people who've got comorbidities and are vulnerable. And I think that's the great misgiving of this government, the great failure that they haven't been able to really get the easy part right, and that's just administer a decent vaccination program so that people that want to get vaccinated can get vaccinated when they want to, and they've been unable to do that. And that's why, unfortunately, in Australia, there's millions of us that are locked down, but in the rest of the world, they're opening up.
Well, see, my issue with all of that, though, is that, Matt, the truth is the reason that people are locked down right now is because X number of cases and Y number of exposure sites freaked out the Chief Medical Officer of New South Wales, who informed the Premier of New South Wales that the only thing to do was to have a lockdown. Despite the fact that, as I say, 0.03% of everyone who got a test today ended up having COVID. If people get tested, then we're on top of all of the outbreaks. This is our problem here, where we've basically got two tandem conversations that don't seem to meet, which is if you test, then you're on top of it. If there's not a huge spread, then you're on top of it. Yes, vaccination means that you don't have to have testing in the first place, but isn't that a reasonable point, that the actual reason you're locked down in Sydney right now is because the Chief Medical Officer said to the Premier, lock it down?
Well, I think the problem is, Paul, that if you do get a huge spread, there's a big problem because it's a highly infectious disease and it can have fatal consequences. And we've all seen, not only in Australia, we've had hundreds of deaths, but throughout the world where countries have fared much worse than us. So if we're going to be safe in the future, and I think that's what Australians want. They want to, they want to open up, they want to move around, they want to get their normal lives back, but they want to do it safely. And you've got to say that the measures that have been put in place by the states to date to keep people safe have been supported by those populations. Look at the WA election result, the Queensland election result, the Tasmanian election result, the Northern Territory election result. They've supported those governments taking those measures. Now, the next step is, how do we start opening up? And you can't do that if you're going to keep people safe. You can't do that until you get the vaccination levels up.
I don't disagree, but Rowan, 8.2 million people have already had a shot, which means in a couple of months they'll be fully vaccinated. We're going to get to 10 million, I say, within 60 days. We'll easily get there, right? Whether it's 12, 13, 14, 15, the medical people won't even sit around and agree on what that number is. So then what happens if we're sitting at 12 and a bit million, just people don't want to take it any further? Then what the heck are we going to do here?
Well, there's a false assumption in Matt's thinking there that it's lockdowns or vaccination, that somehow, lockdowns are an important measure. We know from around the world that they haven't worked in many places. So we could end all the lockdowns tomorrow. It's irrelevant. The vaccination. The only lockdown that is important is how much we open our international borders. So the idea that Matt says that an incentive is the end of lockdowns, that's like saying to someone, I'm going to stop kicking you. I'm going to stop kicking you in the stomach to encourage you to go and do something. That's not an incentive. An incentive is something positive. You say, you don't lock people up and then say, hey, guess what? We're going to let you out if you do what we want you to do. Incentives can take the form of, as in some states in America, they've done lotteries, there are other things. But denying people their basic freedoms and saying, okay, now that's an incentive if we give it back to you. That is not in a democracy. But the second really important thing that nobody has mentioned here is the Delta variant. We know from overseas that the Delta variant is more infectious and, in fact, is more infectious amongst people who have been vaccinated. But here's the great news, it's far less deadly. Correct. And that's the point. This virus is behaving exactly like all viruses. It is on the way out. That's how it is mutating. It is getting less deadly and more infectious, which is how all viruses operate. So the good news is that we probably don't need this magical 80% plucked out of nowhere. We know that perhaps 30%. In fact, if you go back to March of last year, they were actually saying, the epidemiologist was saying, around 30 to 40%, that's enough to get herd immunity. So we are on the right path in Australia. We have the luxury of being able to keep our borders closed, but gradually opening them as we see fit and controlling through contact tracing. We've got the best of all worlds. We don't need to panic about vaccination. By all means, encourage it, but we don't need to mandate it.
Agree completely. Last one here, lads. The Teachers Union in the United States has said, we must keep teaching about critical race theory. This is the stuff that, of course, modernity is a horrible thing. White people are evil. All of the instrumentalities of whiteness, inherent whiteness, that there's a social condition called whiteness. You know, we've talked about this stuff for a long time. Rowan has on Outsiders for even longer. We showed you the examples at the start of the show of people, even on the 4th of July, saying that, oh, no, America's not the best country in the world because we support things like Israel, etc., etc., etc. What does it say that the teachers' unions, who, by the way, played their politics last year and refused to go back to work because, in part, it was used as a punishment, so parents would get annoyed at Trump and they got the result that they did? Because we know that kids are not the problem when it comes to COVID, but if teachers' unions decide to draw a line in the sand, then it's pretty difficult to get past them, literally picket lines and all. Critical race theory couldn't be a more corrosive thing to be introduced, let alone excitedly introduced by so-called educators in America, could it, Rowan?
Yeah, well, what was interesting in that clip you played, Paul, and this is the same, whether it's about climate change, COVID, anything else, critical race theory in particular, when the kids were asked, well, name a better place than America, well, we don't know anything. They always, you get to the second question with kids who are educated today and this stuff, and they never have an answer because it's basically just propaganda and brainwashing. Critical race theory, let's be really clear, is racism, out and out racism. It is terrorizing young children. White kids come home in tears from school. It is creating the most revolting friction. We've seen murders by people in America who think they have permission to go and murder whites. We've seen the most repulsive actions, brainwashing of children that either if they're black or coloured, that they're somehow victimised by these dreadful white children sitting next to them. It goes against everything that Martin Luther King ever taught us, and that tells you all you need to know about critical race theory. It's evil.
What do you think, Matt? Where are you on critical race theory?
Well, to be honest, Paul, I hadn't heard too much about it. No one's written to me about it. I don't think it's a really big issue here in Australia at the moment. I think people have got other things on their mind, namely trying to, open up their economy again and get back to normal work. Look, I think that we should teach the facts to kids, and important part of the history, not only of America, but of Australia, is around race relations. So certainly in America, if they're teaching facts around the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks, issues such as that, then that's important because it's teaching American history. Similarly here in Australia, I would expect that my kids at school would learn about the stolen generation, would learn about the freedom rides and the importance that those social movements played in Australia's historical development. I just think that we tend to can overplay these things a little bit too much. If you're teaching facts to kids and you're teaching history, then there's nothing wrong with that.
All right.
Sorry, Matt. I have to ask, is it a fact that white children are naturally racist? Is that a fact? Because that is being taught in this country. I hope you never become Education Minister, pal, because that is being taught in this country, that white children are oppressing, they're naturally racist. You're happy with that, are you? Is that what your government would allow to occur?
Rowan, I've got 45 schools in my electorate. I visit them regularly. I've got 4 kids in school at the moment. They've never come home and told me that they've been taught that. I've never seen a parent complain to me about their white kid being taught that in an Australian school. I've never seen a teacher complain to me about that. In my view, it's not being taught in our schools because I've never seen any evidence of it.
Well, it is being taught, and I urge parents out there to send their letters to Matt Thistlethwaite, because there's plenty of people out there who are very unhappy, Matt, with what is being taught in our schools under the guise of facts about race relations.
Good on you, Matt. Good on you, Rowan. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you again into the future. Thank you, lads. Do appreciate it. Don't forget, get the Spectator magazine, a weekly dose of common sense in written form. Now, after the break, we're going to tell you about Airbnb, how they're going to screw you over if you want to go interstate and borders closed. I'll explain all of that, as well as yet another example of huge downsides for regional Australia about renewable energy. We'll explain more with people who are being screwed over by it, while people in Melbourne have their feet, well, up and feeling better about themselves. More in a second. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget, you can always jump onto our Facebook page for the 24/7 conversation. Doing our best to try and boot out a few anti-vaxxers, but still, feel free to fight back for common sense, as this is the last line of defence when it comes to common sense. And it's 24/7 at facebook.com/Paul Murray Live. Also, all the videos of this program are up at the brand new and very exciting skynews.com.au. Just go searching for Paul Murray Live in the opinion section. Now, I want to show you something here. You remember how police have got a little bit over the top when it comes to policing some of the COVID rules, particularly outside. Now, you may remember examples of literally police just walking up to people saying, "Oi, what are you doing here? Move on." Don't know why they're English, but it makes it easier, doesn't it? Remember when the police cars were driving around parks in Sydney to move people who, God forbid, were sunbaking? And of course, over the past couple of days, there's been annoyance about too many people gathering in and around places like Bondi Beach. In fact, it has even been so important that the Deputy Commissioner has mentioned it in the daily briefings.
I'd also like to highlight the fact that over the weekend, with the particularly decent winter weather, that there were many people out exercising and doing their recreation, and police were very visible in those places, right from the city and outwards.
That's the same bloke who this time last week was telling us about the 2 nude blokes who went sunbaking. Well, we learned today via Chris O'Keefe, who is a great straight-up reporter over there at Channel 9, that has this. Not a single example in the entirety of New South Wales, in the entirety of the pandemic, has there been a case of COVID transmission outdoors. So what exactly were they policing in the first place? Why are they walking up to random people who don't have COVID, who aren't going to hand it to anyone in COVID, and nobody has handed COVID while outside during the entire pandemic? Well, that's, of course, because the chief medical officers are the ones who are the tail that's wagging the dog here. They're the ones that are telling us don't touch footballs. They're the ones saying that people who come from hotspots like Canberra, because it's geographically in the middle of New South Wales, can't go and see dying relatives in Queensland. Well, Nick Cater has put pen to paper, as always, and writes beautifully in the Australian newspaper about the absurdity of these people who must be obeyed. The nutty professor in South Australia, Garth from Wayne and Garth in Wayne's World up there in Queensland, the crazy cat lady, Professor Crazy Cat Lady, I will call her from now on. Nick, how did these people end up not just giving advice to government, but just advice that cannot at all be resisted, never be resisted on basic logic? And today, to see that it required a news person to go and find that not a single case of COVID has been transmitted outside in New South Wales in 18 months.
Well, look, Paul, we've been concerned for some while about the nanny state. Now, here we see the nanny state in human form, you know, nagging, cracking the whip, telling us what we should and shouldn't do. I mean, these are the same people that were telling us we were drinking too much and that we shouldn't have fat in our diets, and now they've changed their mind and we can have fat, we can't have sugar. This is the public health brigade, and I think it's probably been the best we've got. But, of course, their reaction is always no risk whatsoever. You know, any risk, if there's a risk that the football may be carrying COVID-19 and one little kiddie touches it, we can't have that risk. But as you and I know, the world is full of risk, and normal people take risks every day because that's how they make money. So they're really quite out of touch with the way I think the rest of us have to live our lives.
But I can understand where, let's just be as forgiving as possible here, right? Early days of the pandemic, they think that the blob is making its way from Italy through the United States. My goodness, this thing's going to come. Anything it touches, it's going to get under the doors. Everyone's going to die. Well, it, of course, turned out not to be the case, right? We know who this thing's gone after. So obviously you just fortify the people that it's going to go anywhere near as best as you can. Other than that, you don't tell healthy people in their 30s that they can't walk and meet their mates at the beach. So again, I understand the early days of nervousness, but even when, and I've got to say I was so heartbroken when Gladys decided to follow in, when the truth is that the system's worked. Thousands of people go and get tested, 0.012 or 3 have the virus, which means any grey area is being taken out of this.
That's right. I mean, this is what astounds me. They haven't been able to change gear, Paul. I mean, yes, in the early days, we didn't know the extent of this thing. You know, cruise ships were laden with passengers full of COVID, were discharging the passengers on the shores. We didn't know what was going to happen, but we did know. Certainly by October we knew we'd got most of the elderly were safe. We'd managed to lock down the nursing homes. And if you look after October, we've had, I think, 2 deaths. We've had 2,500 cases and 2 deaths. So we've effectively cracked it. We've kept the vulnerable safe and everybody else goes about their business. But government finds it so hard. It's like a supertanker turning round. And they haven't been able to change gear. And thank goodness for Josh Frydenberg today making those very wise comments that shows at least some realisation they've got to have a strategy that allows COVID in the community, as long as it affects people that aren't going to die of it. Do you know, Paul, that only 1 in 500 cases of people under 50 has resulted in death so far? And with a new variant, it's probably more like 1 in 1,000. So This is no worse than the flu for people under 50 or people under 70. Probably. Let's keep the people over 70 and those who are unwell very, very safe indeed, and let everybody else go about their business.
Well, also, here's a question, right? To everyone who goes to one of those press conferences tomorrow, okay, feel free to ask your insert chief medical officer, okay, how many people are in hospital right now? Can you give us an age breakdown of those people? How many people are in ICU? Can you give us an age breakdown of those things? Because otherwise, if it's just a number constantly, you keep thinking that it must be random ages all over the shop. We all know what that picture's going to be. Now, I know that when you write an article, generally speaking, you don't write the headline, but please take credit, because the fatuous rules fail to pass the closed pub test is a brilliant headline, Nick. So I'm going to say you wrote it. Well done.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, mate. There he is. Nick Cady, you can read him in the Oz. You can see him with, of course, the Menzies Research Centre. Now, Airbnb. Now, this is largely a huge way that people, of course, you know what Airbnb is, but this is a way where you can rent somebody else's house for a long weekend, for a couple of weeks, and it's a really good thing if you're going away for a family or going away with a bunch of mates. Now, little problem is that there's a lot of people who will go and get a place on the Gold Coast if they don't live in Queensland, somewhere in the regional parts of Victoria, you get the deal. But, of course, border closures, bang. Now, till now, you've been able to get some sort of a refund out of people. But guess what? They've changed the damn rules in and around all of this. And Anita Burgess joins us to talk about this because, Anita, I think it's pretty red hot what they've come up with here, which is that basically you don't get a refund now if on the Tuesday before the Friday you are due to check in, they slam the damn border shut. How have they changed this? How have they been allowed to change this rule?
Good evening, Paul. Thank you for having me. I first of all want to let you know I actually am in New South Wales and got an Airbnb in New South Wales because I was cautious about border closures. But we're in lockdown in Sydney. okay, which means you can't even travel to the place where I was traveling to. You cannot leave your home. So I did think about border closures, and I was thinking about my family and what would happen if something happened like lockdown. Now, there's something called credit, which I thought, you know what, we'll get a credit. We'll get a like-for-like credit, which we have received on any other, whether it was a flight, whether it was accommodation, whether it was a cruise or anything since the pandemic. We've either received a full like-for-like credit or a full refund with anyone. I had a honeymoon last year that didn't happen, and we just had it just before lockdown now in Hayman Island. So everyone else has kind of come to the party. But what's happened here with Airbnb, when lockdown happened, I was told to contact my host. So Airbnb has now given the T's and C's to the host. They're basically washing their hands of it as of March last year. The host then comes up with their own T's and C's to suit the situation. So I booked during school holidays with another family. We were 7 children, 4 adults. We asked her, could we please get a like-for-like credit? I'd already discussed this. I'd already thought, we are in COVID era right now. We are thinking, we're not just throwing money down the drain. I really did think about what would happen if something like lockdown, border closures or anything like that would happen. I said to her, can I please get a like-for-like credit? We're happy to do it next holidays or wherever we can. She offered me during the week, not in school holidays.
Yeah, and look, as a person who has made similar bookings, right, for our family, yes, we're not talking about a $200 investment here, okay?
No.
And we're not talking about the super fancy, like everything. It doesn't matter where it happens to be. Could be middle of nowhere or the place everyone wants to go. It's sky high, regardless of when you want to get an Airbnb at the moment.
Correct.
So, to me, it seems pretty obvious that by now, National Cabinet should have at least dealt with the idea of, okay, do we have to go and change, things at the Fair Trade Commission, all the rest of it here? Because this should be illegal. Because let's be honest, the amount of T's and C's that they can decide to put into all of this, it's the fine print, and not everyone's reading the fine print. They're just, fingers crossed, busy banging it out before you go to bed in between times when the kids start screaming at you.
And you know what the interesting thing is? I actually read the T's and C's and her thing, and under her T and C policy during COVID, she states she is flexible. But then again, everything has its own definition and they can really just roll with what they want. And what's happened is we actually ended up being pushed to cancel so she could then keep the booking with the person that's already there. We lost 50% of our money. The kids obviously are disappointed. And you know what actually is the saddest thing, Paul, is that, COVID brings out the worst in people and also the nice things in people. And unfortunately, I think with this Airbnb thing, it's really bringing out the worst in its host and the platform itself.
All right. Well, firstly, congratulations on your marriage and your delayed honeymoon. Secondly, best of luck for the September holidays. And if there's anyone who's got a property would like to help us out, come on, let's bump her up to at least 4 stars. Let's be nice here. All right, get in touch with us and we'll pass it on to Anita. All the best, mate. Thank you for the chat.
Thank you, Paul. Take care.
Good on you. Thank you, Rockstar. All right, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live, including if you would like to join us on Instagram, just go searching for Paul Murray Live. And I searched for my notes to say, that's right, Army Horowitz coming up in a moment here on Paul Murray Live. It is vital that you support the people who support us, and right here in the Man Cave, there is no more prized possession than the image of a bogan kid with the President of the United States, the Prime Minister laughing along, the greatest selfie in the history of Australian television from the Oval Office. Can't be beaten. Well, even higher than that in our hearts is Wingman. Wingmanbeer.com.au. They are the key sponsors of Paul Murray Live. They, of course, have full strength, mid-strength, half strength. You can get them in cans and in bottles if you want to work out what shop is selling Wingman beer and the version of it that you would like. Go to wingmanbeer.com.au. It is so important to us that it's even above the photo of the Orange Man. And we are never fair weather friends when it comes to either Wingman or the Orange Man. They've got us both for life. All right, let's get into the conversation right now with Gideon Rosner and Linda Scott. Gideon, good evening to you, sir, in oh-so-free Melbourne and lockdown at the beginning of another week. Is Linda Scott, of course, here as well.
G'day, Paul.
Yeah, Gideon, how's freedom? Can you remind me what it's like to leave the house without a reason?
Oh, I'm just rediscovering it myself, Paul, but you give me a bit of a hankering myself, Paul, but you give me a bit of a hankering for both Wingman Beer and Return of the Great Orange Man. So I support both, and I'm not a fair weather friend of either.
Correct. Good man. All right. Linda. Now, Linda, again, I keep reading in the newspapers about these loans. Front page news all the time. Has anything changed since the last time you said nothing to see here, it's all been repaid?
Yeah, clearly nobody in the Labor Party, if you haven't been attacked by the Australian on a pretty regular basis. So, you know, I feel like I'm earning my cred, Paul. Yeah, it's disappointing, isn't it? Because I've just addressed this so many times now on your show now and again, but also at an address I gave recently at the National Press Club. We took some loans, we declared them, we paid them back. There's just nothing more to see here. And the story is just disappointing, extremely misleading. But, you know, I'm happy to keep answering questions about it and showing up and doing my job.
Don't worry about the Australian. It's just a sign that Clover's worried, mate. Remember, she is running. You are running as well to be the next Lord Mayor of Sydney. So, good use of taxpayers' money or bad use of taxpayers' money? This one comes out of the City of Melbourne, where they've decided that they are going to spend $1.37 million over the next 2 years building social partnerships. This is all about the LGBTQ community, also making sure that LGBT people, asylum seekers, young Asian women, could all be part of a more inclusive city. Now, I don't think any of us have a problem with the concept of a more inclusive city, but Gideon, in that city are these things called, what are they, businesses that employ LGBT, cisgender, you name it, people, even some white people, dare I say, are employed in these businesses. Yet, if the local council had $1.3 million to help stimulate those businesses, is that the better place to put the money than on the LGBTQI plus thing?
Well, that's the thing, Paul. Why, of all the things to be doing, and don't forget, this is the City of Melbourne. Now, Sally Capp, the Mayor and the Council were useless last year on coronavirus restrictions. They didn't have much to say at all about the fact that the city that, by the way, in the CBD that I've lived and worked in for 10 years is looking like a dystopian hellscape now as a result of these lockdowns. And if anything to say about that, if they have a spare $1.37 million to play with, as you said, why don't they reduce the burden on businesses? Why not waive permit fees for things like buskers, food trucks, outdoor dining permits? Why not lower rates on these businesses that have struggled? It is completely tone deaf. And as you said, a vibrant city can be enjoyed by everybody, LGBT, asylum seekers, Asian women, whoever else this is supposed to target. Why not build something that the entire community can enjoy and try to bring a desperate city back to life?
Linda, please tell me why, if you had $1.37 million over the next 2 years, that the priority wouldn't be to making sure that the businesses who end up are your rate payers are not given that extra support on top of everything else.
Well, I'm sure if Nicholas Rees was here, the Deputy Lord Mayor, he'd obviously point out all the other investment the city has done in Melbourne in all those different kinds of things. They've done stacks of business investment. They've done a stack of support for a lot of their traders, and they're doing really great things in the City of Melbourne. Can I say, though, that it's in stark contrast to the City of Sydney, where we last week passed our budget. It saw a $40 million reduction in infrastructure spending. We had lots of amendments on the table to try and get any business grants in the City of Sydney, given we're in lockdown, all rejected by the current Lord Mayor. It was a most unusual situation where you had Liberal councillors and Labor councillors working together, advocating for business support. You had Liberal councillors and Labor councillors advocating and moving amendments together to try and get more support for our businesses, and they were rejected by the Lord Mayor. And yet she's doing a stack of pleading to the state government. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for working with state and federal governments to support people during lockdowns, but I just can't see the sense in not, as our own government, also providing a bit more support for Sydney businesses in lockdown. So, you know, at least Melbourne is investing in their communities, they're investing in their businesses. It stands, I have to be honest with you, in stark contrast to the current Lord Mayor at the City of Sydney right now.
Now, that's called an on-message pivot. You're in the middle of a campaign. Good luck with it. Now, let's talk a bit of Melbourne Grand Prix, which look, I love the Grand Prix. I think it's a magnificent event. I never understand the people who moan about it. And clearly it should be going ahead, all right? In the same way that they plan for the footy to be going ahead with certain crowds, this event needs to take place. You could even end up having back-to-back weekends like they've just done in Austria because, well, it is, of course, a COVID-safe thing. But the state government won't make the final call to fully back this thing in Gideon, the consequences of which are not insignificant, but this is an opportunity for Melbourne to literally get back on the global map, and why not be able to even host 2 Grand Prix?
Well, look, I agree it should go ahead. I'd be very sad to see the Grand Prix canned, but I was very sad to see it canned last year, and it should have been canned then. Look, at the end of the day, Paul, we can't have international events while being a closed-off hermit kingdom of a city like Melbourne has been for the last 18 months. We have to decide, do we want to be a walled-off city on the hill where no bad germs can ever come and affect us ever again, or do we want to be an open city that attracts international events? We cannot be both. I think it's a great shame, as I said, that the Grand Prix got cancelled. I think it's a shame that the AFL Grand Final was played in Brisbane last year. I think it's a shame that we've cancelled not 1 but 2 Anzac Day marches because of this virus. But that is the cost of what we are doing in Victoria. And again, there are much more desperate things that happen under lockdowns and over the past 18 months than the cancellation of sporting events. There have been people with very real and desperate problems. So, you know, I'd be very sad to see this cancelled, but this is a symptom, not the disease itself. The disease is this state-sponsored hypochondria that has engulfed this country, especially Victoria.
Mick Palmer, former long-term Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police, he has joined in with other former law enforcement officials who've said we can't arrest our way out of the current drug situation, that the war on drugs and the way that it's been fought for a long time, put simply, doesn't work. What do you think, Linda, about an intervention from somebody whose job it was to help stop this international trade?
That's an extraordinary intervention from, as you say, Paul, Australia's former top cop. But what's so interesting about it is that he's clearly extremely well informed about the evidence. And he's highlighted in his really pretty controversial comments from the person that, you know, used to hold this role, that actually there's just so much evidence for taking a health-based approach to reducing this problem. Of course, there's no doubt that reducing supply reduces the number of people that actually take drugs. There is an abundance of evidence for that, but it doesn't seem to be able to ever completely solve the problem. We've got an injecting centre in Sydney. Certainly it was very controversial when introduced and opened by Labor Premier Bob Carr, but there's not been a single death in that injecting centre. It has absolutely transformed inner city Sydney from a place where there really did used to be deaths on the street, there used to be needles absolutely everywhere, to a very different neighbourhood where people don't die on the street anymore. We've even now got our, again, Conservative Premier here in New South Wales announcing a drug court out in Dubbo, something that the current Mayor, Stephen Lawrence, has advocated very strongly for. So we're seeing, again, both sides of politics taking this different approach to law and order, and really seeing people who are addicted to drugs as people with a health problem that need a health solution, because we've just seen now time and time again, you lock people up. Unfortunately, it doesn't prevent crime. It doesn't help these people recover from their drug illnesses. And it's just actually an evidence-based approach. I'm sure you'll have people here saying, oh, you know, they're compassionate and that's not the right approach. Actually, it just works. It works to prevent crime. It works to get people off drugs.
All right, get in there, get in before we're done.
Look, I have to agree with Linda. The fundamental thing about the war on drugs is that it has failed. Drugs are easier to access and more widely taken than they ever have been before. Far from getting rid of the social problems, the perceived social problems with drugs, the war on drugs has actually accelerated social problems, not least of all by locking young people up for a silly mistake and criminalising them and pushing them into a life of crime and keeping them out of the job market forever. Now, I don't like injecting rooms because nobody wants a hothouse full of junkies in their neighbourhood. Nobody wants it's not fair to the residents in those communities. But really, we look at places like Portugal where they've decriminalised all drugs, and not only has there been greater rehabilitation, but drug use has actually gone down. I think this police commissioner is right. We can't arrest our way out of this problem. It hasn't worked so far, and we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. And the only people that are winning from all this are the criminal gangs that cannot be stopped with one-off drug busts like we've seen.
Good stuff. Thank you, Gideon. Thank you, Linda. We'll talk to you all again very, very soon. Straight after the break. Ballarat, beautiful part of Victoria. You know that we went there with our town. Well, of course, the countryside is amazing, and a huge part of it have a lot of farms. Those farms produce things like potatoes for things like McDonald's or McCain's. But guess what the Victorian government's planning to do? Put dirty grey big power lines over the top of it. But of course, it's renewable energy, so nothing to see here, right? Bugger that. We fight next. So in beautiful Ballarat, where we went to a couple of our towns ago, beautiful rolling green hills, amazing stuff, right? Well, as you know, in Victoria, they're blowing up coal-fired power stations. So in order to replace the power generation, it's all about renewable energy. But as you know, on this program, we don't have a problem with renewable energy in and of itself, but we want people to be honest about the costs of the transition. Now, apart from anything else, there's an environmental cost when you decide to put solar panels built by slave labour in China, or wind farms built by slave labour in China. And of course, to get the power to come back to central Melbourne, you need those dirty big power lines. The dirty big power lines that have all of the radiation issues around them, but more importantly, the way that it'll just blight that local landscape. Now, this is exactly the fight that is happening right now in and around Ballarat. It's something that you name all the different type of farmers, they are being completely screwed over by this decision because they're not being compensated for whatever the heck might be coming off those power lines that'll be affecting the stuff that they grow below. They will only be compensated for the little bits of the towers that hold the lines up when they touch their property. So think about that. The 4 little legs that hold up the wire, that's all they're getting compensated for, not the effects of the power lines over their agricultural land. Emma Ellsworth is one of those that is going to be affected by this. Her family are farmers in that particular region, and she joins us now from Melbourne. Emma, thank you so much for the chat. This is the consequence of blowing up coal-fired power stations, is that they're trying to build a new energy grid, but that energy grid means these cables go right over what sort of properties?
Paul, we're talking about premier spud, spa country, tourism destination for Victoria, which is the Daylesford region. And talking about honesty, we're not seeing any information to the community. Even local government has no information about the proposed Ballarat North Terminal Station. It's hosted on private land by the Haynes family. There are no specifications. It will be 12 MCG size ovals. Wow. And the community is pushing back.
Well, what is amazing is that when I was in Ballarat, you could see literally from the highway the signs of normal people who don't want to get political, but they're deciding to put signs up in their fields to say, hey, this can't happen, especially, again, as you say, about Daylesford, massive tourist area. But then again, literally people that are growing, you name it, and obviously the spuds have got a bit of media attention of recent times. But what is the consequence going to be for farmers if you've got 190 kilometres worth of buzzing power lines over the top of your fields?
You're talking about people that are involved in potato production. We do hay. Other types of uses, tourism operators, hospitality. It will change the way they farm. They can't irrigate with lateral or pivot spray. It's going to have a severe impact on their livelihoods, their ability to continue to farm, and they've been there for 5 to 6 generations. So it's going to have a massive impact, and this is a rallying call to farmers that you don't have to provide access to AusNet. Community are pushing back, and we're calling on our state and federal politicians to come out and help us fight this David and Goliath battle.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you make sure that we get all the social media details? I'll push them out in all of our things, all the different ways people to get in touch. Emma, thank you so much. We are there for the fight, okay? Can this TV show, I guarantee you, if you want a spot on the telly to fight back, you'll get it here, okay?
Thank you, Paul.
Good on you, Emma. Thank you, Emma Ellsworth there, who is joining us from Melbourne. That's a big fight. That's one we have to get on top of and get on top of ASAP. I know why people keep voting for the Labor Party in Victoria, in that particular region. Remember, they locked you up for COVID when it was only in the suburbs of Melbourne. Now they want to put 190 kilometres worth of power lines so people in inner city Melbourne can feel better about where their power comes from. Wake up. The man who is well and truly awake is Amy Horowitz. The man who's a YouTuber, documentary filmmaker, provocateur, well-dressed American. Well, it's not the 4th anymore. Of course, it's the 5th, but happy 4th to you. How did you celebrate Independence Day yesterday?
Barbecue, baby. Then, of course, I had to go to sleep early on a holiday weekend to wake up and come on your show. So I don't particularly appreciate that.
I sincerely apologise. Now, we showed this a bit earlier in the show, but there's some reporting about campus reform, which is people who have got the set of stones to go onto these stupid university campuses and talk to some of these kids about just how lefty and indoctrinated they are, where they were asked about, do you still love America, support the 4th of July, all the rest of it. No, not one of them. It's all about the inherent problems of the United States. Yet it still is that wonderful place where I love that you've got the hot dog eating competition and all the rest of it there that happens at Coney Island. But I get a feeling that when future generations roll in, they're not going to want to celebrate. They'll prefer to celebrate Juneteenth than Independence Day.
Yeah, look, I am the son of an immigrant. I'm a product of immigration in this country. And the love I have for this country, the blessings that I give to this country are immense. They're indescribable. I have to be honest, and this is what I feel, is that an immigrant who comes here, now look at you, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and those acolytes who follow you. If you're an immigrant and you come here and then you crap on this country, the greatest country the world has ever known, you know what? I got to be honest. There's no place for you in this country. There's a special place in hell for people who treat a country that took you in. From wherever horrible place you came from, and for you to sit there and crap in this country, it's an awful thing. It's truly an awful thing.
And we know that that BLM has often been the Trojan horse for much of this cultural destruction. You've got an excellent documentary that's about all of this. Now, we're going to show some of the vox pops that come from it, but tell us about the work that's gone into this doco that shows at the heart what BLM is really about.
So we spent over a year going to every major riot, dozens of protests, and I've spoken to hundreds of protesters and rioters all across the country. I think there are very, very, if any, people on our side of the BLM spectrum who have as deep as perspective of the people who are involved than we do. And it just, something seemed off with the organization at the beginning, even before all the riots. And the more we investigated, the more we uncovered the simple truth. The simple truth is that Black Lives Matter as an organization simply wants to tear down all of the structures of this country, all of the institutions of this country. When people say, oh, Black Lives Matter is not Marxist, that's hyperbole. That is absolutely and unequivocally false. They're absolutely a Marxist organization. All you have to do is ask them. And the problem, what we've seen is that the country's media organizations wouldn't ask the questions. They spoke with the people I spoke with. They were there with me on the ground. They were interviewing the leaders like I did of this organization. They simply didn't ask the questions I did. And this documentary, it is, it's rare that I tell your audience, go watch this thing, but go watch this thing. It really lays it out on what this organization is all about. And it is horrific. It is scary stuff.
Yeah, here's part of what they told you.
We just got to get rid of the whole shit, start up.
Burn the whole shit down.
Yeah.
If there is no change, there might be a lot more destroying until there is.
Riot's the voice of the unheard.
But I think some destruction and looting kind of sends a message to people, and breaking their shit is justified.
So when we take it back or we burn it down, yeah, we getting back what's ours. You won't give it up? Okay, you ain't having it no more.
This country was built on violence, and when people had enough of the violence that y'all have against us and we give it back to y'all, y'all wouldn't be mad.
Now, people can find this on your website, on YouTube. I'll make sure that we link it all on our socials as well. Ami, this is the thing. I love the Jedi mind trick of the left, right? Like these are not the droids you're looking for. I've said this to you before, right? But people whose full-time job in the mainstream media to cover this was to expose exactly what you've been able to expose, yet they tried to pretend. Literally, remember, building on fire on CNN, mostly peaceful protest. It is amazing that, no disrespect, you don't have magic powers, you just have the balls to go and ask questions. But these people didn't do it, and it's a disgrace that that's the case.
Now, I was there real time. I was watching this happen. So I can tell you, I was at these riots. I was in Portland watching a federal building being burned down. And I saw CNN and MSNBC, and I saw their cameras down when these people were throwing incendiary devices on the building. But when the federals came out to throw tear gas to push these guys back, then their cameras went up. I was there when I was asking people on the ground, should we start killing all cops? And they're telling me on camera, yes, absolutely we should. And then another guy came over, by the way, an Australian media organization, came to the person and started asking questions, didn't follow up with anything I asked, just said, how do you feel? What's happening? What's going on? Listen to the entire conversation I had. This is media malpractice at its finest, or at its worst, actually. And I want to make something clear. What you heard the people in my Vox Pop speak to, those were not loners. The heads of the organizations who I spoke to uttered the same words. When I asked one of the founders of BLM, should we start targeting and killing police officers, she smiled coyly and said, I don't want to answer that on camera.
Wow.
This is what we're dealing with. And they are now in Congress and the Senate and teaching our children and now teaching our military. This is bad. This is very, very bad, Paul.
You're a rock star. Thank you, mate. Army Horowitz, you can find it in lots of different places online. I'll make sure the links are up on our Facebook page. Quick break. Back with more. What do two very impressive independent women think about Julia Banks coming back yet again on the behalf of the Ghost? Oh, couldn't possibly say that. They just have the same publisher you'd never heard of. When she's had a crack at the Prime Minister again. More in a second. Can I introduce you to two ladies who I wish had way more time on the TV show tonight, but alas, I have been a bad host. Naughty boy, naughty boy. Lisa Goddard is in Queensland right now, and locked down for her sins is none other than, hello mate, is none other than Liz Storer as well. Lovely ladies. Now, I had a whole plan of other stuff to talk about, but can I get you to respond to Julia Banks? Julia Banks, one-term MP, who cares, was a suicide bomber politically for Malcolm Turnbull, decided not to recontest the seat that she had won, instead wanted to go and be a spoiler against Greg Hunt. Yet this is, of course, she's now got a book. Of course, complete coincidence that it's the same publisher as The Ghosts, but here's what she had to say in a very soft touch on the ABC tonight.
I left because of that 3 months of treatment where I realised Morrison, the most powerful man in the country, I describe him as like a menacing, controlling wallpaper. He was either doing it through...
Yeah. Okay, whatever. I want to hear from you ladies here. Lisa, what do you think of this here? I get it, it's all part of a rollout for a book, but fair income. Not going to name anyone, vague references to this, that and the other, yet it's given roll gold treatment. As a person who knows how to launch a book, you couldn't dream for something better than this.
Well, it's roll gold treatment by the ABC, so no surprise there, Paul. But look, it fits into this political narrative of making women's issues back front and centre again as we head into a federal election. And look, to be honest, all of the allegations aside, and no one condones, and we've said this over and over again, no one condones any sexual inappropriate conduct in any workplace, never mind in Parliament House. But put that aside for a second, and then let's look at pre-selection within the Liberal Party. You've got an example here in Queensland where we had 5 people up for pre-selection in the very safe seat here in Bowman, and you've had a male put forward. So one of the contenders was a highly educated barrister. She had, I think, 88 votes against his 107. Now, here is a man, if you want to talk about the nitty-gritty of the politics that's being played here, you've got Prime Minister Scott Morrison rightly saying, we want more strong, independent women representing our country in Parliament. Yes, we all do. Name me a man or a woman in this country who doesn't agree with that. But what we have happening at branch level is a man who 10 to 12 years ago put out a tweet put out a message on a group chat, fat-shaming women. Now, that's not acceptable. Now, when you look at what he does for a living, he is a media advisor. And now nowhere today, and perhaps I'm wrong, but nowhere today in his statement did I see the words, "I'm sorry." Instead, the statement was, and I want to make sure I get it correct, was, "It doesn't reflect the person I've grown to be. Like lots of men, I'm embarrassed about some of the things I said when I was younger and would never say today. I'm sorry. What we expect is and I'm sorry, and it's not good enough." I just think this whole pre-selection, the power needs to be taken away from the branch members, and the parliamentary wing needs to have some sort of say over the people, the women that we're putting forward. And I'm against quotas.
Yeah.
But I just think this whole system stinks the way it is.
No, I'm with you. I wish we had more time. Genuinely, Liz, response?
Look, I got to say I disagree. I don't think a man being pre-selected should be making the headlines. It is in the hands of the Labor Party, and if people don't like it, they're more than welcome to join their party, become pre-selectors and have their say. I don't think women should ever be put up by any major party. And I thought it was a great win that a man has been pre-selected out of was a man and 4 women up for Dr. Laming's seat to replace that guy, and it was the man who got pre-selected. Why? Because one of the major parties in Australia, and I think this is a badge of honour, still refuses to bow the knee to this identity politics that says your gender matters. What's between your legs matters. No, we have 151 seats in the House of Representatives, and millions of Australians just want the best and brightest sitting in those seats. We don't care whether you're male or female, how you identify, we care what's in your head. And again, it's a tactic of the left to go, you tweeted something 12 years ago. Who hasn't done stuff 12 years ago that they seriously regret?
Gang, I need your help here because we'll talk to the producers. I want you back tomorrow night. We'll do it half an hour earlier so there's plenty more time to fire up, okay? Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Liz. We'll do it properly tomorrow night. Bad hosting from my perspective. More in a sec here on Paul Murray Live with The Front Page.